Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is going to be another Raid Shadow Legends video, and today we're going to talk about something a little bit different from what I usually talk about. We're going to be talking about faction wars. I don't think I've really ever done any coverage on them because I feel like it's so dependent on the champions you have. But at this point, I feel like we have enough champions where every faction is pretty viable with a couple of different ways to go about it. And so what I want to do today is talk not specifically about any one particular team that can do it, because it's so dependent on the champions you do have. But I want to talk a little bit about the approach I'd take, and I want to cover every faction. I'm not going to do all of them in this one video. In this video, we're going to cover just Skinwalkers, and we're going to start with that. I have it open today, and I'm going to go through every faction as they open up to give you guys kind of an idea of how I would approach doing this regardless of the champions you have, just kind of looking at the things I'd be looking at and the way I would build those champions. Now, obviously, I have to make a really big caveat. I have really good gear. I have a lot of gear. I've been playing this game for like 3 years now. I have accumulated a lot of quality gear, and I'm using a lot of my quality gear, right? Most of it's rolled up. A lot of you probably won't have that luxury. And of course, depending on where you're at in this game, you might not even have enough champions in this faction to be able to compete at the highest levels. But what I can talk about is the way that I construct my team and the thought process that goes behind it. And that should allow you guys to be able to build your teams in a similar fashion, right? Maybe you don't have this one particular champion I'm using, but you could use a different one instead. Maybe you don't have this particular gear set, but you could use something else in place of that to get a similar effect. And definitely try to craft your team, because when it comes to these areas of the game, especially when you don't have all the resources in the world, all the champions, all the gear, you really have to approach it from a logical standpoint of like, what roles does this team need and how am I filling those? And so that's kind of the stuff I want to talk about in this video. Obviously, I'm going to go over the specific champions. I'm going to go over how I geared them, and I will talk about some alternative champions that I would look for in this faction to be able to use as well. But I kind of want to give that big caveat out in the beginning so you guys understand where I'm coming from. I feel like the information I have to give is still valid, even if the specifics might not apply to you. So, with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to talk about all the different bosses in this faction that you're going to go through, all the stages, and then I'm going to talk about the Stage 21 team that I've built not using OP champions, no legendaries involved at all, to give you an idea of how you can go about doing this regardless of the champions you might have. I really appreciate you coming by to watch this video, and if you enjoy it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below, the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And of course, if you enjoyed today's music, we have that Soundstripe link down below in the pinned comment description of this video, along with my code DeadwoodJedi to save yourself 15%. And of course, if you're looking for account work, you can find that on my website, deadwoodjedi.com. So when crafting a team for faction wars, or really any area of this game, it's important to know what you're going up against. Now, every one of these factions, there's going to be some waves that are going to be really problematic and difficult to get through. And I'm not going through each of those waves. I'm not going to go through every stage in this faction. But what I will do is I want to talk about the bosses that you're going to encounter along the way to give you an idea of some of the champions or the types of champions that you might want to bring in to help combat those difficulties that they are bringing to the table, right? The waves themselves are going to be difficult. And some of these factions, the waves, in between, like stage 20, might be more difficult than stage 21 for you based off of the champions that are in there. But typically, that's not the case. Usually it's the bosses that are going to be kind of the parts that are going to hold you back and stop you. So let's talk about those really quickly. Now, we're going to first start off here with stage 7. Obviously, stage 7, the biggest thing you could do is have 5 champions that are level 60. That's going to make a huge difference for it. So it's not always something that you need to really worry about too much as far as getting through. If you're stuck on this right now, basically just give your account a little bit of time and you should be able to get past it. It's not really a concern. But as far as the specific things you're going to want to look at, and these are things that you're generally going to want to do pretty much, I would say. You're going to look at his skills, look at what's there, and then think about ways that you can combat this. So this boss, right, the Incinerator, attacks one enemy, places a poison debuff for 3 turns, decreases the target's turn meter by 35%. Okay, well, poison's not that big of a deal, and turn meter reduction sucks, but it's only one of your 5 champions. So again, not that huge of a factor. As second attack, attacks all enemies, places a true fear debuff for 1 turn. Also places a poison debuff for 3 turns and decreases turn meters of all enemies by 50%. Now, this one can be tricky, right? You're getting the turn meter decrease on all of your champions. That's problematic because that means that the boss is probably going to get a second turn right away unless your team is going fast. So one of the things that this tells us is we need speed. We desperately need speed on this team so that these turn meter decreases don't affect us too much and we miss turns. That's something we don't want to do. Obviously, the true fear is a problem as well. So having somebody with high resistance that can cleanse could be a real big boon to your team. If they can go first, cleanse that true fear off everybody, then nobody's really missing a turn with that. True fear can be really problematic. So having 1 or 2 high resistance champions, probably not a bad idea. And at this stage, I don't think the resistance level you need is going to be that ridiculous either. And then he has a passive an HP burn on an attacker when hit. That's not going to be something we need to really worry about as far as that goes. It's like poison, right? HP burn, poison. These are things that suck, but if you can bring a little bit of cleansing or block debuffs, those are going to be really helpful as far as getting through this faction, I would say. But even if you don't, as long as you bring enough healing in, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. So that's kind of the big thing with this guy. I don't really see anything that we have to work specifically to counter this. The only thing I'm worried about is that true fear, and those HP burns can be pretty annoying too. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for cleansers. I'm looking for block debuff champions in order to include in this team to help us go through it. And if I don't have those, at least enough healing so those HP burns and those poisons are being counteracted as they're ticking off. Those are kind of the 2 things I'm looking at with this. Obviously, you still need to do what you can to get through the waves and to deal damage along the way as well. So those are kind of a couple other little things that you're going to want to keep in mind. On stage 14, you hit another boss, and this is the Disruptor. This is probably one of the spots where you start to actually really having a need to craft your team, right? Because it gets a little bit more difficult at this point. Now, the A1 is a 2 attack, and it's with a provoke. That can definitely be problematic. When your team's getting controlled, then you're no longer in control of the fight, and that can always be a problem. So that's something we're going to want to, pay attention to and take care of. A2 attacks all enemy, places a true fear debuff for 2 turns. A 2-turn true fear is really problematic. So again, having block debuffs, having cleanses is going to be really, really helpful to get through that. And then the passive ability places a freeze when hit. This one's annoying, and it can't be resisted, so that's definitely a problem. Again, block debuff is really, really helpful. So what are we dealing with? Well, the provoke can be bad, but it still lets us use our A1 skills. So if you have champions with strong A1s, it's not as big of an issue. Again, the freeze is problematic, but it's a 20% chance, so it's not going to be all the time. And if we can resist, if we can't resist it, but if we can block that debuff from landing, that'll be really helpful. And then, of course, we have the AoE, the A2 with the true fear. This is hugely problematic. So having 1 or 2 champions with a high resistance so they don't get true feared, and with some cleansing so they can help their allies out, would be massive for this faction. And so that's one of the things that I'm definitely looking for as far as going through this. How can I resist these abilities or cleanse them off? That's going to be really, really helpful for getting through stage 14. And we're going to get back to how do we do that with the champions in this faction in a little bit here. But those are kind of some things that we want to keep in mind going forward. Strong A1 skills will be helpful, as well as having a couple resistance champions with some cleansing on them. And then we get to stage 21. The boss is the Mirrorer, and we're going to go ahead and this is the one we're actually going to do a run of, so you can actually see how I put this team together and how it's going to work. Now with this, the A1 is the Fickle Courage, attacks all enemies, 25% chance of placing a fear debuff for 1 turn, and increases per buff placed on this champion. So if the Mirrorer has more buffs, he's going to have a higher chance of landing that fear on all your team. It's an AoE attack. This definitely could be problematic if it gets to be if it happens too often, could definitely be problematic. And then A2, Mirror Universe, attacks all enemies, steals all buffs from each enemy, then transfers all debuffs from this champion to a random enemy. Then applies a debuff spread effect, taking all debuffs from that enemy and placing them on all enemies. This is problematic, right? He's stealing your buffs and putting his debuffs on your team. This can be really difficult to deal with. And so this is definitely something we're going to want to pay attention to. This boss itself is one of the harder ones. And then it all comes to fruition and problems with the A3. exchanges remaining HP levels with the target enemy. This one, I hate this one. It's very frustrating. With a lot of these bosses, this can be really, really difficult because as you're healing up and staying full and getting him down, all of a sudden he swaps HP and now he's full again. And this can always be a problem. Now, as far as how to deal with this, right? Well, fear is annoying as can be. So again, we're still talking about those things of like cleansing and blocking debuffs. Those are going to be massive for us. If we can block that debuff, that'll be huge because obviously we have to put debuffs on the boss. But then the other part where he steals our buffs can be really problematic too. And so we got to be careful about what buffs we bring in. The last thing we want to bring in, for example, would be like counterattack. Now, obviously with Skinwalker, it's not something we really have to worry about, but that is something to keep in mind. You don't want to bring something in that's going to then hurt your team. Block debuffs is a prime example of that. So we get in this catch-22 of what buffs do we bring in, which ones don't we? And then, of course, the HP level exchange is annoying, but not much we can do about that. What it does mean, though, is we need to be able to burn the boss down before that skill comes off cooldown. I think it's a 15-turn or 14-turn cooldown, so we have time to do that. But it does mean we're going to need to bring in some serious damage dealing. It means we're going to need to bring in decreased defense and probably weaken as well in order to deal enough damage to burn him down in time. So these are all things that are really important to consider as we're going through and building this team. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the champions in this faction before we jump into the run, so we have an understanding of the kinds of champions we can bring in. Now, like I said, we're dealing with Skinwalkers in this run, so we're going to be looking at their class, their champions, to see what we can bring in to make this work. Now, I don't have any legendaries in my team. I have legendaries on my account, and I use them, and they're fabulous for it, and it makes a really big difference as far as beating down these bosses in these stages. But I wanted to show you how you can do this without those necessarily. And we talked a lot about blocking debuffs, cleansing debuffs. Well, this faction lacks a lot of that. It's actually really problematic as far as trying to deal with these ways. So we kind of have to we have to go kind of a different way as far as these bosses go, right? That true fear, those fear debuffs, you know, those things are really problematic and hard to deal with. And so there's a couple other options you can do. Obviously, you can just have strong enough gear and champions and just beat them down, right? That's always a way to go. But there are other alternatives too, right? We can do things like bring in resistance on our champions so that those debuffs don't land on us. That's certainly an option. Maybe not my favorite, but one that can be vital. One champion I would look to do that with is someone like Steel Skull here. Steel Skull has a cleanse, single target, right? So it's not the best, but they do have a cleanse as well as a bunch of healing in their kit, and that can be really, really helpful for us. In addition, brings poisons that can help burn down the boss even if we're not doing great raw damage. Another thing that we can do, and I think this is actually really important, is bringing in a reviver. Especially if you're struggling against these bosses and your champions aren't all full level, you're going to want to bring in a reviver to help you heal up, help your team stay alive so you can get the full 3 stars. Hofari's the Tusk is the reviver in this faction and very, very good at it. So definitely somebody I recommend. Bring some nice little buffs for your team, right? Brings a little stun on the A1 that helps a bit when you're talking about the waves, and a nice resistance aura. So he can be actually really useful for dealing with this. Unfortunately, the rest of these guys, they don't bring what we're looking for. Flesh Terror is pretty nice as he can extend the duration of buffs and he brings in some heals. He can also decrease the duration of enemy buffs and increase the duration of enemy debuffs. So there's definitely some nice stuff about him, and a little transfer on some debuffs and stuff like that. But generally, there's not a lot of cleansing ability. There's not a lot like protection stuff in here, at least with the epics. Now, there are some other alternatives. We have champions that can steal buffs, like Snorting Thug. When we talk about stage 21, Snorting Thug actually can be pretty darn good. Let the boss steal your buffs. He's just going to steal them right back, or at least strip them off, right? And that can be a really nice way to go about things. We have plenty of poison champions, from Fane to Steel Skull to Taurus. Even Yaga can be useful in that sense. And so Scabrius, so as far as like dealing damage to the boss, we don't always have to rely on raw damage. Sometimes we can rely on passive damage like poisons. And we're talking about, you know, the stage 14 or stage 7 boss. This could be a really good way to go, especially considering the fact that we're probably being feared, true feared, frozen, etc. We're probably having a hard time getting a lot of turns in. Letting poisons do the damage for us when we do take turns can be really, really effective. And then, of course, you know, as far as decreased defense, we really only have one option, and that's Fane. Fane is absolutely I don't want to say vital, but kind of vital to making this work, because decreased defense really helps a lot as far as burning down the boss, especially for stage 21. If you don't have a Fane, if you don't have a Leorius or a Coronar or one of these other legendaries that can kind of bring in decreased defense or weaken, it is going to be a challenge to get through this. Now, there are some, interesting epics or rares down here as well that are worth looking at, to be sure. One of the ones I'm actually going to be bringing to this run is Lamibur, who I think is an insane healer and really, really good for this team. As this A3 has a really big heal plus revive on death. Single target though, so not great. But more this A2 with a continuous heal for 2 turns on AoE attacks, really nice. The A1 has a chance of filling turn meter. So there's some nice stuff in Lamibur's kit actually I'm bringing in because I think it's going to be really helpful. In addition, somebody like Gnarlhorn can be really useful, right? The A1's not a big deal, but we have a Provoke with an increased defense buff and an Unkillable buff. As far as getting through waves, Gnarlhorn could be really, really helpful for that. Grappler is not somebody I would bring in. I don't know why I clicked on him. Greybeard is another interesting champion, right? We got a shield counterattack. We've got a freeze as an AoE. And a Provoke on the A1, another champion that might be worth considering using as far as getting through those waves go, especially when you're talking about the earlier stages of this. I think that might be a really interesting option. Now, we do have Fleshmonger. Fleshmonger is another decreased defense champion with an AoE on it. That's pretty good. 4-turn duration, not the best, but outside of that, pretty good. And, with an extra turn on this A2 ability, could be really, really nice to have, actually. And so this is another option for you. So I think between Fleshmonger and Fane, you do have options for decreased defense, and those would probably be the two I'd be looking at. In fact, for many of you, Fleshmonger might be a better option because they're probably going to be about the same difficulty to keep alive, but having an AoE decreased defense can be massive as far as trying to take down the waves. And if you're struggling for damage, that's a great thing to have on your squad. So there's definitely some options as far as ways you go about to do this, right? You have a lot of healing in this faction. That's the one thing I really like. Between Steel Skull and Flesh Terror and Lamibur, you actually have a fair amount of healing going on. Not to mention champion like Rain Beast, who can be really good. And I've actually beaten this with a few different variations. I'm going to show you the last one I used, but there's more than a few different ways to go about it. And then, of course, you do have Ursine if you really need an AoE decrease attack as well, which can be really useful getting through the waves. If you're taking a lot of damage, that's going to be really helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run on auto. You guys are going to be able to see us get through the waves and get through the boss and how I'm going to navigate this. Now, obviously, you don't have to run on auto, right? You can actually manual this, which makes things a lot easier when actually doing this, but I'm just going to let this go. My team is strong enough to get through these waves, no problem, and I'll show you the gear at the end that I have on them. But one of the things you're going to notice here, right, it's really when I'm building my team, I'm talking about roles. I need champions to do specific things for my team, and some of them aren't even going to do that particularly well here, but that's kind of the goal that I'm looking for here. Now, I need to make sure I have carry champions, right? That's going to be important. I need all 5 champions to live, so that means I need healing or ally protection or increased defense or revive. I need somebody to keep the rest of my team alive. At least 1 champion, most likely 2, maybe even 3. In this team, I have Hofaris, who's amazing carry as far as a reviver, right? Revives 2 champions with 50% HP and turn meter. It's great. That's great. I just need that ability in there. And then I also need some healing. So we have Lamibur, who again puts those increase or healing buffs on the team for 2 turns. That's enough, right? If I can get a little 15% heal every turn, that's really, really big for us. So those are 2 champions that are going to do great work for us. On top of that, we have that revive on death, which you just saw go off for Fane when she went down, right? What else do I need? I also need to bring in some damage and some control. Well, for control, I can bring in champions like we were talking about earlier, like Greybeard, who can do some provoke or some freezes. These are kind of things I could bring in, but I can also bring in just the normal champions I want to use and put sets on them that will help me control enemies. Provoke, freeze, and stun. Those are massive sets when going through faction wars because they're kind of B tier sets and very niche, but for these faction champions, you're not necessarily using them in a lot of other areas, and as long as they have enough AoE attacks, that can be really, really useful. Now, okay, I'm going to stop talking about roles for just a second because we're at the boss here, and I want to talk about how to deal with this boss in particular. First off, get rid of the ads. Get rid of the guys on the side. So target them, do whatever you need to. Those two are going to make your life a living hell. Make sure you kill them first. That's got to be the first thing, because what do you get? Yep, Templar puts on a provoke. The other one does leech. It's just real annoying stuff. So you really want to take those off as soon as you can. That's got to be your first priority. Once you get those two down, then you can start focusing on the boss. And when we get to the boss, I'll point that out for us. When we're talking about rules, though, you know, like I said, we need that control somewhere in there. And in this one, I have Lammerber in a stun set. I have Hoferes has a stun on her A1. For us, with this team, that's actually going to be enough. We don't need like a ton of control to make this really work here. And then the only other thing I really need to bring is damage. And that's huge, right? That can be damage due to buffs or debuffs, I should say, like decreased defense and weaken. With that, I have actually Feign for that. And even though it's single target, with this team, with the way I have them built, that's going to be enough for us, right? We don't have to be fast. We just have to be successful. And so that's great. I also have, I think it's Snorting Thug in there, who's doing some other control stuff for us by being able to steal buffs, which I think is really nice. And then we have, I want to call him not Flesh Terror, Ripper. Ripper's in there as well, doing some solid damage for us. Now, okay, we're at the boss here. Now watch this. Steals our buffs, right? Puts the debuffs he has on our team. To deal with this, I do need a manual. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can manual the whole run, or you can just specify, you know, get your team kind of in sync if you can get the speeds linked up right. But for me, we're gonna manual this. So I can start here. Hopefully it's just A1, right? Whatever, I don't have any other skills. Now, because he just did the buff steal, it tells me this is a good time to go ahead and place these buffs on my team, right? I can put the continuous heal on ourselves, and I don't have to worry about it at this point. This is really important to time that out really specifically. Now we can get some, Ripper there can do some damage. Hopefully we can steal that strengthen buff. We stole that back. Now you notice the boss doesn't have any buffs on. This is why I brought in Snorting Thug. If he steals buffs from us, we can steal them right back. I don't have to worry about it. Feign can get in there. And now the hard part is, when do we land our debuffs, right? Putting up our buffs, we need to make happen right after that steal, so that those aren't stripped from us. That's going to be vital for us. And then as far as putting the debuffs out, that's going to be really important to time that as well. And the timing here with Feign is actually a little problematic at the moment. So we're not really going to get really great result at the moment. So we're going to have to kind of roll through this a little bit here. Let the healing do its job. Let us take a few turns in here. Let the continuous heals do their work. Burn down this boss just a little bit, and we should be good. Because what I want is all these buffs to fall off by the time he's ready to steal again. And you can see we're down a 1 turn duration. He's going to steal on the next turn, so I'm not going to place any more buffs right now. At this point, all I'm going to be doing is trying to deal as much damage as I can. Heal, maybe not even heal up, just try and survive a little bit longer, right? And so that's really all I'm doing. And I can go with the strengthen buff. Like I said, we can do a little bit of stealing, so I'm not super concerned. So I can bring Feign back right there. Go ahead and try and land some more. Oh, no, hopefully she doesn't die. Okay, she didn't die, so that's good. So now I can put my debuffs off with Feign, and that's going to be really good for us. We got the decreased attack. Now we'll be taking less damage. This is important. We can go ahead and steal the strengthen buff back. Excellent. Give ourselves crit rate and attack buffs. That's good too. Get the continuous heal out there, so we start healing up a bit and we can survive a little bit longer, right? In between. That's going to be really important. And again, we're just trying to burn this guy down. Doesn't have to be fast, just has to be effective. And go ahead and heal up Feign right there. Perfect. Everybody's still alive. It's good. And that fear debuff, I'm not really concerned about it. It's annoying, but it's not really a game changer here. Now I could use Feign's A3, but it's a 3-turn duration on those debuffs, and I don't want them coming back on us. So I'm actually going to wait a little bit on that as well. And that's basically all we're doing here, is just biding time and making sure everything's set up for us to be as successful as possible. Okay, you can see the damage now is not that significant, so I don't really have to worry about us dying nearly as much. We're just going to cycle the A1s so I can revive again and start healing everybody up. And I think we can go ahead and revive right now. Perfect. We're still alive. And hopefully this will work just perfectly for us. Boom. Okay, whole team's up and alive. Let's go ahead and steal that buff. Now it's good. Now it becomes go time, right? We have a big hit there. Now, one of the things with Ripper is he decreases the max HP. which should help us when he does the heal exchange, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I brought him in. It's not super effective, to be honest with you. Kind of a waste of a slot. I could definitely do with somebody else in there, be much more effective, but you know, why not try it out? But look, we're gonna get some damage in there. Perfect. I have him in a destroy set too, but there you go. That's the HP exchange. We knew that was gonna happen. I'm not as worried about that. Now the whole job is just to make sure we can recover and, you know, survive again. So we got those debuffs. Now we have decreased defense, decreased attack, weaken out there. The boss isn't going to be doing anything to us, and now we're actually going to be doing way more damage to the boss than we would otherwise. You can see these hits are getting pretty big, and it's just a matter of time now, really. And you can see that counter on that HP exchange. We need to kill him before that gets to 0, and so that's our goal here. That's all we're looking to do. Thankfully, we have some strong damage dealers in Fane. We've got Ripper here doing some pretty good work. I don't want to put the buffs on just yet. Probably cycle through one more time here, I think. Ripper might go down. Hopefully not, but we'll see here. Boom. All those debuffs expired, so he wasn't able to transfer any of them. At this point, we heal up, and we're good to go. Basically, I could click auto at this point, and it's going to work out just perfectly for us. Increased attack is really helpful. Getting that damage in, getting decreased defense and weaken. Look at that. Yeah, game, set, match. Easy peasy. There you go. And that's how I did it. Now, is this the ideal team? Absolutely not. In fact, the only champions that I felt were really important for this team was Hofreis, Lamubur, and Fane. They're really the only ones I really needed. I thought Snorting Thug was really helpful. If a buff got stolen, we could steal it right back. Didn't have to worry about it. But there's plenty of other champions I've actually tested this with beforehand. I used a Rain Beast to really good effect. I used a Steel Skull to really good effect. Those are two excellent champions to use. And honestly, I would have liked to have used somebody like Grappler in this team. Somebody else that could, you know, control the waves. I feel like that might have helped us with that part of things. And Fleshmonger, I completely overlooked when I was building this team. That's another excellent champion to bring in with that AoE decreased defense. Might have been a really good substitution for somebody like Fane, actually, to make this team work in really good faction. So there's plenty of ways to go about building these teams. This is not the only one, but I felt like this was really helpful. We could have brought in Yaga and add more poisons. We could have brought in Taurus and done the same thing. That would have been really effective too. There's plenty of approaches to this, and that's always something to kind of keep in mind. The approach is, there's many ways to do it. You just got to know the roles you're trying to fill. You know, again, you want to get your carries in there. That usually includes a reviver, but not always. If you can stay alive, then you don't need one, obviously. But a reviver can be really, really helpful. You want to make sure you have your decreased defense, your damage dealing abilities, right? That can be just poisons and HP burn, but typically that's going to involve decreased defense at least, if not weaken as well, to help deal more damage more quickly to the bosses and the waves. And then on top of that, you need someone to actually deal that damage, right? And of course, control. Control is really important. Now you can do that with speed. You can do that with provokes, with freezes, with stuns. There's lots of ways to go about doing that, but it is really important to be able to control the waves, especially when you face some of the tougher ones. The waves in this boss battle were a lot easier than some of the other ones I've faced. There's no Valkyrie, there's no Martyr, no legendaries at all. So it's a lot easier to get through, but that is something you want to keep in mind as you're going through. Make sure that if there are tough waves, that you're bringing enough control in there so you're not having to deal with them all the way through this. But yeah, that's kind of the approach with this. So I figured I'd take a quick look at how I geared these champions out so you have an understanding of it. We got Hofreis here, the Tusk. I have him in a full 6 set of protection gear. It's not really necessary. I just did that so his buffs wouldn't get, or the buffs wouldn't get stolen all the time, but I don't really think you absolutely need that at all. It really doesn't matter. As your carry champions, the only things you need: enough HP to not die, enough defense to not die, and enough speed to cycle through your skills. That's it. That's really all you need, right? If you can add resistance, that makes it that much easier because it means that their skills will always be available for you. So the way I built mine out was with those things in mind. 207 speed. I mean, for me, that's actually not that fast, but for Faction Wars, that's plenty fast. Oh, 58,000, 59,000 HP, 2,500 defense. 350 resistance. These are numbers that were able for me to run through it, not get debuffed at all, and survive, and pretty healthily too at that. So these are kind of, obviously you can work with less numbers. I know I did when I was first going through this, but you want to just make sure as you go through the waves, you're dying too early. I need more HP, or I need more defense, or maybe I just need more speed so I can let the buffs do more work or cycle through the skills faster. If you're having to revive too often, like we kind of did in this one, a little bit more speed would have helped because we would have cycled through those skills even faster and allow us to take more turns. That's always helpful. Mastery wise, I don't have any masteries. 0 masteries. Didn't think about it, didn't even notice it, but 0 masteries. This happens sometimes. I don't need them all the time to make these things work. We're able to get through it without that. Those would only help us. Adding more resistance, adding more defense, more survivability in general, right? Would definitely be helpful for this. Got Snorting Thug here. Now, these are crit damage gloves, by the way. They're not rolled up. They're rolled up to 8. Right? So we're leaving a lot of damage on the table with this. Put them in a retaliation set because we want them stealing those buffs as much as possible. Got him with enough accuracy in order to steal them. That's all I need with this guy. His job was twofold. Deal damage and steal buffs. That was it. And he did a pretty good job of that. 209 speed, again, fast enough to take those turns, right? Outspeed the enemy. 50,000 HP, 2,000 defense. Barely enough, but it was enough. He definitely was close to going down a few times, but he was able to survive with the healing we had. And more than enough accuracy. We definitely don't need that much, but it got the job done. Mastery-wise, I do have him with masteries, right? Offensive and defensive masteries. Again, just stay alive, deal damage. That's all we were looking for there. Then we have Fane. Now, this is actually a clan boss build I have on Fane. I didn't touch a thing as far as building her. So she's not particularly fast, but huge damage dealer. And I do have good damage stats on her. So she hits very hard, as you saw. But, 6,000 defense, 240 crit damage, 176 speed. You don't need these numbers, right? In fact, her HP's way low at 28,000. She's got a low base, so it's hard to build up. Low base defense, hard to build it up. But, there's a myriad of ways you can build these champions to be successful. Her job yes, to deal damage, but more importantly, to land the decreased defense in the weekend. All I really needed on Fane was enough accuracy. In fact, I would love to have more speed on her, but I didn't really want to change the build. And so more speed, accuracy, that's really all I need. I can let War Master procs do all the work for me. I don't need her to be a damage dealing champion. It just speeds the run up, right? So as far as that goes, that's an excellent approach. Now, obviously with this boss and the timing of that health steal, that's always a factor we have to keep in mind. But if we can allow that to happen, we should be in if we can make sure that we can kill it in enough time, it doesn't really matter, right? So, if we're landing enough poisons, we're doing enough, of the debuffs anyway, and we're getting War Master procs from all of our champions, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Mastery-wise, you can see we do have War Master and Support Tree just to help land those debuffs. It's pretty typical clan boss build for me. And then we had Ripper. Now, Ripper is kind of not a good champion, and honestly, even utilizing him in this, it was more of like an experiment. Let's see what he can do. My thinking was, hey, I'll reduce the max HP of the boss, and then when he steals the health, he won't be able to steal as much. It just won't be able to. He can't steal full HP if his full HP is a lot lower than it should be, right? It was kind of effective. It didn't hurt us for sure, but I don't know that if I were doing this for the first time and really struggling through that would be my approach. But it can be effective. If you are having a hard time killing down the boss in time for that, the health, steal, this could be a good way to go. I have him in a destroy set to help with that. So every time he hits, he's really reducing a lot of the max HP of the boss. And if we're talking about 100,000 HP and we're lowering it to 90 or 80 or 70,000, that can make a big difference as far as trying to kill the boss out. Obviously, he has more HP than that. But yeah, the idea stands, right? That's the role I brought him in here for, right? I need him to do damage, and I needed him to reduce the max HP of the enemy. And so that was it. That was his role. So you can see we don't have a lot else on his kit, right? The accuracy is nominal at 200, but we're not here to land debuffs. Crit damage is high. The attack is up. And you'll notice he only has 70% crit rate because we do get a buff from Hofreeze. And it's not up 100% of the time, but enough where I felt like I could sacrifice some stats to bump some others. And it was, I thought, fairly effective. He's got a low base attack. It's not really high, so building his attack up was kind of a challenge. And he did die a few times, so not exactly the best champion in the world for this. But, with Hofreeze as a revive, I didn't have to worry about that as much. I could build him just to deal damage and live with it. Masteries? Yeah, didn't put any on him. Bit of a mistake, maybe, I don't know. But definitely it would have been a lot easier, and we would have reduced a lot more max HP if I had put masteries on him. And so you can see, like, you don't need everything perfect to be able to get through this stuff. And then very last is the People's Champion, Lammerburg. Gotta love Lammerburg. Now, he's also our carry, right? This is the guy that's supposed to carry us through all these waves. He doesn't need to do anything else but that, right? We only really need him for his healing. That's it. And so, you know, I built him accordingly, right? 56,000 HP, 3,000 defense. I just want him to survive. 230 speed. Why is he so fast? Because I need him to land those buffs over and over and over again. He's the one keeping everybody alive, so I need him to actually utilize them more often than not. So more speed, the better. Now, I do have him with resistance. Again, I don't want him getting debuffed because I want him to use his skills, right? So those are the things that I'm looking at when I'm building my carry champions, right? As much speed as I can muster on them, resistance if I can, but it's not always crucial, and then enough defense and HP stats to survive. That's really what I'm looking for out of his kit. As far as like the masteries go, you can see full down support tree and offensive tree, or defensive tree, I should say, all the way actually to being able to get that little extra bonus for the stuns to land is really helpful. And I'm just looking to get as much turn meter as I can, land those stuns as much as possible, get as much healing out of my kit as I can. I got the stun set on him to add a little bit more control to the team. That's kind of the goal here. And so that's what I'm doing, and I thought we were able to do that with really good success. So anyways, guys, that's faction of... So that's the Skinwalker faction. I'm hopeful this was helpful to you guys because obviously, you know, it's very team specific, build specific stuff that not everybody has. I mean, you're struggling through it, not already completed it usually. So I'm not saying everybody can do what I did, but you can see you don't need full masteries. You don't need perfect gear. You don't even need everything rolled up necessarily. But there are certain stat thresholds that you want to hit, right? You want to be able to survive. So that 50,000 HP threshold, that 2,000 to 3,000 defense threshold, those are really good targets to aim for if you're looking to build your champions that need to survive, your carry champions throughout, right? And then, of course, you don't need that much on your damage dealers if you have Reviver in place that can do the job. And, of course, the more speed you have, I mean, I cannot tell you how vital it is. The more speed you had, the easier everything becomes. Everything becomes loads easier. So if you're struggling with this faction, you don't need legendaries to do it, but it definitely helps. And if you have them, I definitely recommend utilizing them. But you know, you want to think about the roles you're using, right? Who's doing the damage for you? Who's doing the debuffing for you? Who's actually protecting your team and keeping you alive? And then who's dealing the damage on top of that, right? Those are the things that you need to really, or who's controlling the enemy. That's important, right? You got to have control out there some way, some form. In this team, we had Lammerburg doing a lot of that with these stuns, right? And we didn't need a ton of it because the waves weren't super strong, but Lammerburg was helping out a lot. Just having one champion miss a turn on the enemy team is really, really helpful as far as getting through the waves. So, you know, these are the things I look for when I'm building my team, right? I'm trying to find basically people to fill all those roles. I need someone to carry us. I need someone to debuff the enemy and set up our damage dealers. Oftentimes it's the same person who is dealing damage because I need that too. And then I need someone to control the enemy, whether through speed or through debuffs like stun, provoke, or freeze. Need some of that somewhere. So that's the video, guys. That's the way I build these teams. Hopefully this is helpful, and we will be tackling another one tomorrow. So stay tuned. Come back around. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe. And until next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.